and Tennessee lands, and we end up with Oklahoma eventually becoming the home of nearly 40 federally recognized tribes, dependent nations with limited sovereignty. Well, what we get about 60 years later is we get the closing of the frontier and the next great disruption, which is Anglo-white settlement in what becomes Oklahoma, principally in three territories. Indian Territory, Oklahoma Territory, and then Cimarron Territory, no man's land. It's impossible to do justice to all of Oklahoma history, political history in 42 minutes, so I'm not going to try, okay? Well, what we end up with is we end up with the state capital in Guthrie, which eventually gets, we're going to keep coming back to this slide, okay? Which has a beautiful neoclassical Beaux-Arts capital built in it. And it stays there until about 1907. What happens? Well, in 1905, the Glenpool play hits outside of Tulsa. And this is the second big oil play to come in Oklahoma after the Red Fort, first one to come in after the Red Fort play. And this brings the oil industry to Oklahoma. Tulsa declares itself to be the oil capital of the world. We have tremendous discoveries in Bartlesville, and great firms grow up, like Phillips. Okay. And then we also learn the darker stories on the backside, which many of us will always remember when the regionally popularized in the popular media. And we keep finding oil. And we find it by our new state capital. If you ever get the chance, I believe my friend Scott Carter is working on a book on the stealing of the capital, Oklahoma City from Guthrie, so you should keep an eye out for that. It's good to read. But from the moment we build this new Capitol building in 1917 going forward, please note it does not have a dome at that point in time. Oil and gas, natural resource extraction is at the forefront of development of the Oklahoma economy, and we lived and died with it. That's one of the great inflections. And we're still there. Look at the campus we stand on now, built on natural gas. President Paul Sharp, former president of OU, told me once when I first got to OU, he said, "Keith, here's the thing you need to remember being here in Oklahoma." He said, "You came here from Louisiana, you came here from New Orleans, so you understand the oil patch. So just remember this. In Oklahoma, you never needed a lot of education, stick a hole in the ground and get rich." And that's one of the great tensions in Oklahoma, is in between education and the role and scope of education and what education will do in economic development. Education has now become vitally important to economic development. We have a long, deep history of not investing in education and of politicizing education. So let's just make a note of that, which goes back to children. As I noted, one of the things that happened in the development of Oklahoma after the oil industry is the tremendous development of the city of Tulsa. Tulsa always had more wealth and more culture, in part arising from the settlement having made Tulsa possible. That part of Oklahoma, that area of northwestern Arkansas, southeastern Missouri, are part of what's called the New England diaspora of Anglo settlement. A lot of the people who settled and came from the east didn't come from the south. They came from around Boston, they came from Michigan. And they came with a different culture, a different set of sensibilities, and a different investment in those things that made community possible. And this is why Tulsa has an early step forward in the development of what we might call high Western culture. But Tulsa has a dark side. Between 1919 and 1924, there were a series of events in the United States that were referred to as the Red Summers. Not only in Oklahoma, but elsewhere, there are a series of motivated white riots against Black communities that occur in over 40 communities around the United States. The Tulsa Race Massacre, the Rosewood Massacre in Florida are among the most prominent and well-known. Okay, so they are not unique, but they are part of a broader effort to push back against both Black political development, Black wealth accrual, integration, demands for integration and inclusion, and then tied to socialism and anti-socialist and anti-communist sentiment in the U.S. That's what we refer to as the Red Summers. This arose because during World War II in the United States, the policing of American nationalist sentiment was taken over by committees such as the American First Committee, which existed here in Oklahoma, which was deputized by the government to ensure the pro-American values would be promoted and preserved in our community. The American First Committee in Oklahoma was, in fact, a beer for the Ku Klux Klan. And by 1923, the Ku Klux Klan was in effective control of state government, including the Florida legislature. An Oklahoma City mayor named Jack Walton was elected governor in 1922, took office in 23, and ran, even though he was a former Klansman, ran on an anti-Klan agenda in an effort to purge the Ku Klux Klan from the legislature. And Walton was ultimately impeached and removed from office, the first of two governors impeached in the 1920s. One thing he had done in governing is he made extensive use of the martial law authority held by the Oklahoma governor. Oklahoma has a very interesting history with martial law in that if you look at the history of it through about 1935, through 1921, the state militia would be sent to respond to either a race riot, which was seen as a black uprising in the rural community, or an Indian uprising in rural communities. After the Tulsa massacre in 1921, on the possibility of violence breaking out, we started proactively deploying the state militia to prevent violence rather than having it respond with violence. The second thing that happened under Walton's tenure is we see the first instances of the state militia being used to actually respond to natural disaster. We see the first deployment of state authority under martial law to respond to a tornado, for example. So we have an evolution in the use of state power. However, we also have some interesting governors who come along. Does anybody know who this guy is?
Bill Murray.
Alfalfa Bill Murray. Thank you, sir. Alfalfa Bill Murray is one of the people we need to know about because he affects Oklahoma to this day. He had drafted the Constitution for the proposed state of Sequoia in 1905, 1906. Then, when asked to come and assist with the Oklahoma State Constitutional Convention, simply brought that Constitution, which was adapted for the purpose of a new state of Oklahoma, an expansive, long, progressive, populist document that creates an incredibly fragmented state government. Multiple agencies, numerous statewide elected officials, numerous boards to oversee agencies. It created a highly fragmented government that, among other things, is actually fairly easy for particular interests to capture control of. Okay. But Murray also was a very creative user of martial law. When he was elected governor in 1931, he'd actually spent the better part of the last 9 years living in South America, engaged in ranching operations in the highlands of South America. And then he came back to Oklahoma and got back into politics, got elected governor. And evidently he learned a thing or two about the creative use of authority from some of the executives that were in early 20th century Latin America. And this particular image comes from a thing that's called the Texas-Oklahoma Border War, or the original Red River War, whereby there had been there was a toll road dispute, a toll bridge dispute involving where a highway in Texas and a highway in Oklahoma met. It's just to the west, about 35 if you headed south. And Murray actually blockaded and stopped movement of traffic from Texas into Oklahoma, and even threatened to dynamite these bridges, preventing the crossing of people from Texas to Oklahoma and vice versa, which many Texans and Oklahoma might actually think is a good idea. But it certainly made Texas football more effective, I'm sure of that. But Murray engaged in a variety of uses of martial law. And I'll give you 3 examples real quick. Because governors have got unusual authority in this state. It's a weak governorship unless they decide to be creative about how to use it. At one point, the Adjutant General of Oklahoma, appointed by Bill Murray, was arrested in Major County for not paying child support and put in jail. So Governor Murray declared martial law in Major County, sent the National Guard up with a pardon and a warrant to release his Adjutant General to his custody and bring him back south from Major County. Another time, OU was going to be playing OSU, and Governor Murray was no fan of public education universities. He wanted to reorganize all the universities. He wanted the faculty in the classroom 48 hours a week. And I'm not going to tell you, I cannot get faculty. There's no way I'm going to get the faculty to teach a 13 load, okay? Trust me, it can't be done. There's no time left to grade. But he was very concerned about corruption at OU and concerned about corruption in the athletic department. So during Bedlam at Owen Field, he sent the National Guard to declare martial law in Norman, took control of the receipts of the football game, had the National Guard perform an audit, and handed the athletic director of the University of Oklahoma a set of best practices on how to manage the finances of the university. I can't see Joe Castiglione accepting that particularly well, but still, it's a thing that happened. Third thing he did, when we were voting on bringing beer back into the state after the end of Prohibition in 1933, he and the Attorney General were in a dispute over who would get to declare whether or not the state question to legalize beer had in fact succeeded and would be enacted. The Attorney General, who was a let, and the governor, who was a dry, were in a dispute over this particular issue. And I'll imagine what Will Rogers said: Oklahomans will vote for prohibition so long as they can stagger the polls. Bill Murray declares martial law in Oklahoma County because down there by Santa Fe Station are a bunch of cooler trucks that have been sent down from Missouri by Anheuser-Busch filled with Budweiser. And he wants to keep that beer under control until he knows whether or not his side has lost, okay? Under both Jack Walton and Bill Murray, roughly half of the time of their tenure, some part of the state or the other was operating under martial law, okay? Not the entire state, but some part of the state was operating under a martial law declaration from the governor of the state. And what's interesting about this, though, is that this is occurring while two simultaneous stresses are working in Oklahoma. One thing that's happening is the city of Oklahoma City is developing rapidly. And if you look at this image, it's from the cover of the Daily Oklahoman. And one of the things back when old man Gaylord still had the paper is he had an illustrator that would do these amazing full-page, front-page illustrations. In the summer of 1931, the end of what was called the Great Skyscraper Race happened in Oklahoma. A wildcat oil man and a set of bankers had each set out to build the tallest skyscraper in the state, not only the tallest skyscraper in the state, the tallest skyscraper west of the Mississippi. And these two skyscrapers went up simultaneously. Okay, so the Ramsey Tower and the First National Tower, which are still downtown, still prominent in the skyline, go up in 11 months, 33 stories high. They top out within a couple of weeks of each other as the basis of the competition of two principal models of economics in the state: conservative banking and wildcat oil. Okay. No sooner they finished these buildings and the price of oil has fallen to about 10 cents a barrel in the state because the depression has become so acute and so deep. Okay. And then the Dust Bowl comes. You don't need me to repeat this to you. What happens over the course of the next decade of ongoing dust storms throughout this region of the U.S. is Oklahoma's population stagnates and then actually falls relative to the national population by 50%. Oklahoma had 9 members of Congress going into the Dust Bowl. They'd come out of the apportionment with 5 in the next census. And it took the better part of 2 more decades for the state to recover its previous population from the beginning of the Dust Bowl. This empties out the western part of the state in particular. The disruption of cotton prices, and perhaps those prices and mechanization leads to large spread displacement of tenant farming down in the Red River Valley in the southern and southeastern parts of the states. And you end up with the Great Migration to the West. And you end up with this iconic image shot by Dorothea Lange of the migrant mother. Now, what's interesting is this picture actually comes from California, but it's associated with Oklahoma. And it tells a story of displacement, which also leads to Oklahoma deploying a change of culture in California, especially around Bakersfield and the Inland Empire Valley. It has one positive cultural consequence, which is creating what's called the Bakersfield sound in country music. That's combined by Bob Gomes. Okay? We come out of that period with 2 particular developments in the post-World War II period. One is the emergence of national leaders coming out of Oklahoma. I'm going to give them to you in brief. Carl Albert's elected in 1946. Within 10 years, makes his way into the leadership ladder of the U.S. House of Representatives. Ends his tenure as Speaker of the House of Representatives in the early 1970s. not once but twice stands in line as first in line to become president of the United States due to the resignation of Spiro Agnew. Okay. And then later on, the resignation of Richard Nixon when Gerald Ford became president. Second, you got the king of the Senate, Robert Kerr, one of the most powerful advocates for the oil industry ever. Died in 1963 unexpectedly young age. Then you got two people a lot of people don't remember as well. Henry Bellman was elected the first Republican governor in 1962, goes on the U.S. Senate and becomes Republican National Committee chairman in the late 1960s. The man who built the modern Republican Party made it into a viable alternative in the state in the 1960s and 1970s. And his counterpart for a while in the Senate, Fred Harris, a Democrat who did something unthinkable in the Michigan state of Oklahoma. He beat Bud Wilkinson, the three-time national championship coach of the OU Sooners, was a Republican nominee for senator in '64. Fred, a little-known state lawmaker who lost a governor's race the year before, beats Bud Wilkinson, is the last national liberal to sit in the U.S. Senate from Oklahoma. Co-sponsor of the Voting Rights Act, dear friend of Bobby Kennedy. He will become Democratic National Party chairman in 1968, and very nearly became Hubert Humphrey's running mate for president in '68 before Humphrey went with Muskie. And Fred tells a wonderful story about that. We can tell. Fred also is responsible for the redesign of the Democratic Party's primary nomination system in the early 1970s when he was chairman, which made a mess out of Democratic Party nominations for 2 decades. And I asked Fred once and said, Fred, what were you thinking when you appointed those men to pick that system? He said, Pete, I thought those men would make a system that would make me president of the United States. A lot of ambition among Oklahoma politicians in this period. This is the period that David Warren comes out of the legislature, becomes governor, becomes U.S. senator. Okay. Followed by Don Nichols, who will become the assistant majority leader of the U.S. Senate. The man who actually fell the majority leader in the early part of the 21st century, leading way to Mitch McConnell, becoming leader of the U.S. Senate. But this period of remarkable political leadership and stability is accompanied by initially a 20-year period of remarkable stability in energy prices, followed by wild fluctuations, a great boom that brings tremendous revenue into the state, tremendous economic development for certain communities, and then absolutely devastating collapse in the oil bust. When I moved here in 1995, I remember I looked around, I called my wife back in New Orleans, called Kim up, and I said, I thought the oil patch took a hit down here in New Orleans. It's like everything in Oklahoma stopped in 1985. It just stopped, and nothing had changed. Why? It wasn't just the oil. It was also our banking industry. Okay. The story of Pennsburg Bank and its demise doesn't just affect Oklahoma, it has national repercussions for the banking industry. Okay? But it has its greatest impacts here. It also led to this wonderful observation, the wildcatter's prayer. Dear Lord, give me one more boom, I promise not to give up. Okay. A tremendous realization is made in Oklahoma. We got to diversify the economy. We've got to change. We can't be relying on just taking things out of the ground, whether we're planting or pumping them. We have to diversify the economy. And right about the time we're making that decision, you've got the implementation of Oklahoma City, the MAPS tax, the effort to basically go it alone. You've got forward-looking mayors coming out of Oklahoma City and realize something in Oklahoma, that you can't do it statewide. That it's going to take communities and the not-for-profit sector and enterprising individuals to really change things. And those sort of, we realize that, then you have to run a bombing. Okay. And this bombing has a tremendous impact in Oklahoma in ways that we don't think about. There's sociology that shows that in central Oklahoma in particular, there's a notable decline in divorce relative to the expected pattern due to this event. There's sort of a hardening towards family values that happens in this part of the country. This part of the country went into mourning for about a decade. And then started to dig its way out after 9/11, which put everything into a different context. But that event hardens us in some ways, but also reinforces things very close to us in terms of trying, and reinforces that notion of the importance of family. I don't know how that ripples in policy, but it's a thing you've observed in the sociology. Okay. So I keep coming back to the skyline, okay? And actually, I shot this about a month ago. I'd finished going for a run in the city and looked at the horizon. It was just amazing. And I like this picture because it puts the skyline, puts the city into context to nature, okay? It puts it into context. I'm going to show you the color for the first time. This is an Oklahoma sunset looking out over the 10-mile flat and looking over the castle. Where are we? And what are the implications for what leadership can do? And what does the model of leadership look like? Because I'm going to put this to you. In the early 1990s, at about, okay, that's not going to work. Okay, here we go. At about the time that the Murrah bombing hits, we have spent 4 years restructuring aspects of the state constitution. We put in very severe term limits, second term limits in the U.S. on the legislature. And generations of courthouse lawyer leadership in the legislature is replaced mainly by small business leadership in the legislature or small careerists, coming mainly from the Republican Party. Okay. Some are very successful, some are not. The periods of long stability of multi-term pro tems and multi-term speakers is replaced in the legislature by a series of successive short-term Republican speakers and a long-term followed by a short-term, followed by a mid-term, followed by a long-term pro tem. Okay. The legislature has been trying to figure out how to maintain expertise and stability in leadership when we're turning over a third of the legislature every 2 to 3 years. And we're turning over the legislature with great frequency. A lot of the lawyers who used to be in the legislature, lawyers don't come to the legislature the way they used to. Well, we've lost that lawyerly expertise in the management of committees and the management and creation of public policy, which means we're depending increasingly on advocates and lobbyists for information and for outside sources for legislation. Okay. So the educational role of the advocate or the lobbyist is a premium in the state. Everybody who studied terminals back in the day said this was going to happen. That we actually made organized interest more influential rather than last operating influence. Everybody thought it was about the relationship. No, it's about the repository of expertise. That's what matters. And so this group now has a repository of expertise. Now, you look at this map of Oklahoma. This is from the 2018 governor's election. The 2022 election looks very similar. Blue are Democratic precincts, red are Republican precincts. And people look and go, Keith, why is it you think the state could ever be competitive again? How are the Democrats getting into the mid-40s in the state? Look at all that red. Look at all that red. And that's what you have to remind people: land don't vote. Okay? Land don't vote. Legislature is apportioned by population. And so part of what's going on is we're in the midst of a 3-decade systematic movement of political power, population, influence, and economy away from rural areas into the cities. Most of the growth is going to be in Tulsa County and Oklahoma County, Cleveland County, Wagner County, Canadian County. You get the idea. Most of the growth is in very few places. And not only is it that there's growth there, there's loss everywhere else. The dark blue counties account for almost all the population growth in the state over the last 10 years. The light blue counties are also growing and account for about 10% of the growth. The red counties is not only that they're not growing, they're actually losing population net. We're seeing the actual outflow of rural populations at a rate last seen during the Dust Bowl. Because the children vote with their feet, the economy votes with its feet. And it's not an Oklahoma phenomenon. It's a national phenomenon. It's happening everywhere. I spent a lot of time in the state of Georgia doing my research. I visited every county and every county courthouse in the state of Georgia, 159 counties, for a book I'm working on historic architecture. And these counties are full of really wonderful people. And I see this in rural Oklahoma too. Really wonderful people trying to make a few institutions run, trying to provide significant, sophisticated services with limited assets and limited money and limited leadership, because the folks that used to sustain these communities aren't there anymore. There are rural counties in America where there might be 3 lawyers available. Okay? Legal services have to come from the outside. We've got communities that have an infrastructure originally built for 25 or 30,000 residents that have 9 or 10,000. Our legislature is still a majority rural because of the design of the districts which stretch in the suburbs, but they keep flipping. They keep flipping. One consequence of this is we end up with a legislature that doesn't look like the future of Oklahoma. Your typical child in Oklahoma is not white. Let's start with that one. Half of the kids that are minors in the state of Oklahoma are African American, Hispanic, Native American, or Asian. They are not Anglo-white. 50 years ago, it was 80% were Anglo-white. At the University of Oklahoma, we take 45% of our student body from out of state, which allows us to subsidize students from in state, because we get 9% of our budget from the state of Oklahoma now, instead of 35% when I came here. And we're doing fine. We're doing fine. You know, we're doing fine. We're doing it. Right? But when we externalize the cost of education through tuition onto the kids, onto their families, we're putting up barriers to attendance. Right? We've got open transfer. You're in good standing in the state of Oklahoma, you can transfer into OU. We can take you now. But the fact is, we're one of the most expensive in-state tuition options in the United States at the end of the day. And we're trying to rectify it. We still have 530 public school districts in 77 counties, and the accompanying administrative overcounting and overcost there. And we're asking teachers to do a variety of things other than educate, because we keep cutting services in other areas. So the question is, when you communicate with leaders, what are you going to ask them to do, and how are you going to convince them of where it is appropriate to do a thing? Right? That's the problem. That's the challenge right now. How do you ask them to do a thing when many of our debates and our politics are over first principles, over what should the state do, or what is our obligation to the poor, and are we going to have this thing called the worthy poor or the deserving poor, and how you define them? Or we're going to make public policy based upon someone who they are. And the question I wrote down for myself, I'm going to step away from being a dispassionate academic for a minute. I had this thought driving up. Does punishing another man's sin eradicate your own misery? That's the question I have. Or does alleviating someone else's misery, allowing them to stand and prosper on their own, does that absolve you of some other sin? However you define that last term, right? Very powerful 3-letter word. Because one thing you cannot get past in Oklahoma is we are going to engage problems from a cultural perspective. And almost every culture that is here, starting with the First Nations, there's a deep spiritual, philosophical component that is imbued in people early on that becomes formative to who they are, and it's going to impact the way they decide things and the way they're going to live. And so the question is, how do you find bridges to speak across those cultural differences, those different cultural perspectives, and accomplish what my kinsman from Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln, said, appealing to the better angel of people's mercies, right? We spend so much time in Oklahoma just trying to survive. It might be nice to stop and lean into that next piece. And maybe we'll give up a little something on behalf of your neighbor. The public will do it. The working class and the working poor in Oklahoma are more generous to charity than any other part of the state when it comes to per capita giving, right? And what's remarkable is I was a dear friend of mine, my running partner, is a development officer, is in charge of development for the regional food bank. And she told me that They have more giving per capita from people that are poor, working middle class than anybody. These people end up becoming their clients from the pandemic. Now they've recovered, they're leading back into giving again. Among our publics, the spirit is there. We just need to figure out how to make good policy and good cooperation between the not-for-profit sector, the NGOs, and local governments to lean into this and do things affirmatively and well, irrespective of policy area. It doesn't require tax dollars. It requires a heart to do the policy, and it requires leadership. And that means looking past partisanship, looking past the stupid arguments you see on social media, and looking at anybody's policy proposals and where is the benefit in general. Maybe we need to imagine other people's ideas. Because I'm not sure that the lesson of how to do it right exists in Oklahoma's past at all. In fact, I'd say it decidedly doesn't. It requires imagination, looking forward and looking to new places. Well, this is for real, okay? This is a great little town. It's losing population. It's also got the best pizza joint in the state. They've got a young woman there who worked at Hideaway in Stillwater. She cracked the code on all the sauces and the crust, okay? So the next time you go over there, it's right there on the main drag, coming in from the east side of town. You got to try this place. We got entrepreneurship everywhere, even in population loss areas, in these beautiful places. Okay? So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take your time. Joe, how am I doing? Joe, you can hang out or leave me for the day. Okay, hey, I'm right on time. This is good. Okay. Any questions? How y'all doing today?
Yeah, talking about Bakersfield and the impact of like Oklahoma migration on country music there. Was that also, had the Bakersfield oil and gas boom already started, or did Oklahoma have a big play in part of that?
Oil and gas exploration was already underway in California, but Oklahoma's got a big role. Yes, yeah. Oil and gas exploration on the coast of California had started initially in the 1920s. Really takes off in the 1930s and 1940s, though. And if you want to see this in popular fiction, go watch the movie The Two Jakes. Jack Nicholson, because it's all about oil and gas exploration in around Bakersfield and Inland Empire. So yes, and there is a role. Back up here.
I just wondered what town the pizza place was in.
I don't remember the name, but I'll get it for you. Okay, there are only two pizza joints in town, and one is Domino's and one isn't, or excuse me, one's Hunt Brothers Pizza and one isn't. So this ought to get you there, but I'll dig it up on the break. I don't remember the name. I went off script and I got caught. Who else? Yeah. I'm not going to sing for you. Yeah, I know all the words to Streets of Bakersfield, but I'm not going to sing for you. You would not enjoy that. You would not be good.
We're talking about good pizza places outside in the metro area. You actually have LLL and Power Pop.
Yes. Oh, very good call. Good call. Back when Kim and I did older retrievers before we had bulldogs, we actually got them from Power. Got them from Breeder up there. Yeah. And so, Jody, maybe a little sound. What do you think about Jonathan Nichols now? Because that's where he went to school. He grew up.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And that's, I would say one of the things we have to ask ourselves in Oklahoma, in brief, there's a lot of talent on the sidelines in both parties due to term limits. And you've seen some people do good work in a low profile, like Chris Steele, former speaker. The late Jonathan Nichols would have been another one. They did not die so tragically. There is good leadership out there that needs places to be other than the legislation, other than elective office. And we got to figure out how to leverage that talent in that place.
And a question about it seems like a certain amount of school districts in Oklahoma. Why did that even come up? Why is that versus other states? I mean, there's substantially less, right?
Yeah. At the time of statehood, we had over 2,000 school districts in the state. And consolidation brought them down. There was a fundamental reorganization in the 1950s also. But it's the same reason we have a relatively large number of counties is it's the existence of what's often referred to as buggy-foot government. The notion was that every child should be able to walk to a schoolhouse and get an education and walk home and not have to walk more than an hour. So roughly you have a schoolhouse spaced about every 4 to 6 miles apart. So it had to do with convenience. We also have to remember at the time these districts were formed, most school districts are actually going to cease having classes if they're in the cotton country allow the kids to go pick cotton and then come back, okay? And oftentimes you only have people going to school for 4, 6, or 8 years, which is why we still have some of these small districts that only have an elementary and middle school, what are called dependent districts, because high school education wasn't anticipated as being uniform and universally available. You could go to the high school in the county seat if you wanted to get it. But it entirely has to do with convenience. It's a leftover from the township approach to governing, which instituted in Oklahoma. It's one thing we got from up north was township organization. That's how that happens. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You talked again about the spiritual culture there. It's kind of a religious place, but somewhere else.
Right.
Do you feel like it has been a good influence on our history or?
Talking about prayer in school. Vision of one particular faith that sometimes is policy, becomes basis policy, we often get in trouble.
We'll have that time. Davis, will you come grab this microphone and walk around for any individuals who might have questions as far as what you might want to discuss? And if anyone has any
We'll hang out.
absolutely, if no one has any questions, we won't be offended. Feel free to go grab your lunches now.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all's time. And Joe, even though I've been working south of that Red River, I'm still gonna have the house in Norman, so I'm always happy to come back.
Yes, Chris.
Much obliged, much obliged.